Hey everybody, Brian Goulet here of GouletPens.com for the 274th time for Goulet Q&A. Today's kind of a special day because we're celebrating our 10th anniversary this coming Sunday of when we started selling fountain pen wares at GouletPens.com. So we kind of consider that our officially unofficial holiday, anniversary, whatever you want to call it, birthday. So yeah, we've been doing some 10th anniversary stuff all week. Got a couple of other videos. Rachel and I talked about some of the more personal side of it right now. Did some 10 milestone products, did a reactions video to some of the videos of old. So been trying to do some fun stuff celebrating our 10 years here, trying to make it entertaining for you all. And yeah, I'm gonna kind of cap it off here with what else but a Q&A. So that'll be fun, but I think we'll probably end up sending a special little message out on Sunday, the day of, by an email newsletter. But as far as videos go, this will be the completion of the 10th anniversary celebrations. So I don't really have any products to talk about today necessarily, but I thought, why not take 10 questions for 10 years? So I had 10 just questions. I'm trying to, since I'm shooting Q&A actually after I've done all the other videos, I have perspective on everything else we've already done. So I'm going to try to give you some new, fresh stuff. Deep into the mind of the Goulet Pen Company here. So I'll try to make this entertaining for you all and give you some new fresh content as we get into it. So let's start off with Alan T on Facebook. Alan asked, what is one hurdle that seemed overwhelmingly daunting, but in fact turned out to be very simple? Well, I think in the beginning, everything feels overwhelmingly daunting, especially because we started this business right as we were having our first child. And yeah, definitely everything seemed hard back then. Now in retrospect, you're like, yeah, it wasn't that bad, right? You kind of forget how hard it was in the beginning. But I think if I had to say probably one thing that I really wanted to nuance here, that seemed daunting but was very simple, was hiring people and delegating and leading other people to help. Rachel and I are very involved. We have a lot of, great work ethic together. We work really well. We complement each other. Bringing somebody else into that fold, especially because we were working out of our house with our newborn baby, that gets a little complicated and or can seem complicated, I guess. And it ended up not being so bad. But the thought of hiring and managing and leading, especially when we were only 25 years old, seems kind of overwhelming. In retrospect now, obviously we've done okay with it. But yeah, it was definitely the kind of thing that stressed us out in the beginning. Learned a lot over the years, read some books, attended some seminars, definitely have gotten our degree from the School of Hard Knocks. But the thing that I've kind of learned is that leading people is not very complicated. It's just hard. So, you usually know kind of what you need to do. It's just hard to do it because you're dealing with people. And sometimes you have to face, things that you did wrong that maybe put you in the situation that you're in. And you have to fess up to that and make it right and deal with some cleanup and collateral damage from decisions you made or ignorance that you had. And we've definitely had plenty of that over 10 years. So there's one kind of, Dave Ramsey was kind of an influential person with his Entree Leadership series and stuff, especially in the midpoint of our business there, 4 or 5 years in. He's got one expression that I really like that seems very fitting, and it's that every leader, especially like a business owner, but really every leader has kind of a pile of the mistakes that they've made. You just want to be on top of that pile, standing on top of that pile instead of standing under it. So I think that's kind of a fitting phrase, is that everybody's going to make mistakes. You just want to make sure that you're learning from them and not getting buried by them. So very fitting. So hiring people definitely would have fallen into that category. This next question is from Gary L. on Facebook. What's the most surprising thing that happened during 10 years of growth that you never would have thought of or foresaw happening? Again, probably most of this. I mean, the size of the company and all that for sure, but I think one of the things that has ended up being super impactful, super enriching towards this whole experience that it's not that I didn't want it, it's that I just didn't have good perspective on it, was our strong company culture. It definitely isn't something that happened by accident. And in fact, if you don't pay any attention to your culture, you're still going to have a culture in your company. But having a really strong, really good, intentional, cohesive culture cannot happen by accident. It has to be by design. And we've been very intentional about our focus on it, but I think for us it was just we lacked perspective on how other companies do things, and we just did things based on what we thought was common sense or what we thought was right. Come to find out, what we think is common sense and what is right is not necessarily the way that everybody else feels about it, in a good way. So, over time, and really in the last couple of years, we've started to get some awards in our local city in Richmond here for being a top workplace. We just found out last week that we were number 5 small business retail, great place to work in the nation. So that's pretty darn cool. And is the first time we'd gone out for the great place to work. And here we are in top 5, which is very surreal for me. So I think, again, that kind of fits on the theme of, we were just kind of doing our thing. We didn't really have, the thing that surprised me is just how exceptional that would seem out there in the general kind of business landscape and the retail landscape. So, I have better perspective on it now because it is a lot of time, intention, focus, and stuff that we put towards our culture and caring for our team. We hire good people. Our hiring process is long and lengthy, and we're incredibly picky. We focus a lot on fit and these types of things. But as much work as that is, the benefits are so worth it because when you're coming to work every day with a place that people are happy, you really enjoy the people that you work with, everybody's kind of aligned in the purpose of what they're doing, they're not really bad-mouthing, they're not really having bad attitudes and things like that, the culture is really positive, just kind of everything that you would think from the outside looking in at our company, like generally it's kind of true, and like the closer you get to it, the more you realize like, dang, this really is kind of cool and kind of unique and special. So that to me has been extremely rewarding and wasn't something that I necessarily knew that we were going, it's not like we started the company and we're like, we're going to build a really strong company culture. Like sometimes that is people's goal, which is very noble. I had no perspective on that when we started out doing things. We thought just having a viable business would have been the end goal, the dream, being able to stay in business because it took us 3 years to even get to the point of any sort of profitability in the beginning. Before we started the fountain pen thing. So yeah, that would be it, the company culture. All right, Brad the Bear 1 on Instagram asked, what's a business owner activity that you fear you'll have to give up as Goulet Pens expands? I think fear is probably a very strong word. Personally, I really work to avoid making decisions out of fear. It's kind of like we tell our kids, we're big into like the Brene Brown kind of language. And so we tell our kids that, bravery is not never being afraid, it's being afraid and still doing what you need to do. So, there's really nothing that, the fear, I don't know, that word fear just kind of stuck out to me. It felt like I wanted to touch on that. But I think something that I realize or maybe just acknowledge that has to go away is some of the one-on-one kind of personal touches. Whether it's by me or whether it's by members of our team. I think back to something like our handwritten notes that we did for the first 9 years and several months in this business. That was something I really didn't want to have to give up, but it just got to the point where, in practicality's sake, it did not make sense to do anymore. So it used to be way back in the day, I was handwriting everybody's notes, a rather long, elaborate note with a wax seal and everything, and it made sense back when there was nothing else going on. I say nothing else going on. We had a kid and we were building a business off the ground, but I had that time. There were not that many orders that we were getting every day, and I wanted to put the best foot forward, so I was willing to put in that time. It got to the point where I was literally spending at least an hour a day of my own time writing these notes, and I was like, is this really what's going to move us forward? So I had to scale the notes back, and then I had to get help writing the notes, and then over time we had everyone on our team writing notes, and they were getting more, simpler and simpler and simpler. Because we were trying to keep that little personal touch, but it just eventually didn't make sense to do. So there's been a number of things like that where it's like, we want to have these personal touches. That's a huge part of what we do. We want to have the connection. We want to have kind of that human element to what we do, and I'll touch on that more in some later questions. But I think for me, it's just a sake of practicality and time. We all only have 24 hours in a day. That is the one thing that is the great equalizer for everyone. No matter how much money, no matter how much anything else you have, time is the same for everybody. So for me, it's like the time that I'm spending doing one activity, whatever it might be, phone call, being on an email, spending time even with my own members of my team. That is time that I'm not doing something else. So as we've grown, I've had to think more and more, what is the highest and best use of my time, energy, skills, etc. And I think about that a lot. Taken to the extreme, I can just work myself to death and burn out. So I do have to balance that out a little bit with what is also healthy for me, because being in a business like this, especially that's growing, you can definitely get to the point of burnout, especially after doing it 10, really 13 years since I started doing this in the earliest days. But to be able to do it for the long haul like that, it's kind of like running a marathon. You can't sprint the whole way. You got to pace yourself and enjoy the scenery along the way. So yeah, I think that to sum it all up, it's the personal touches. It's not that we're going to give them up in principle. We're something we're always striving to do here at Goulet. But I think it's something that's had to evolve in terms of exactly what that looks like, to see what is most meaningful, what is most practical, what is it that, you know, people are expecting of us, you know, because now the expectations are different than they were 5, 7, 10 years ago. So I think we're always evaluating that with contextualizing it based on, you know, just what's going on and what our resources are. But yeah, that's the thing that concerns me the most, is I don't want to feel like we're kind of giving up who we are just for the sake of growth. It's going to look different as we grow. It has to, but not losing that same feeling. All right, Arjan D on Facebook says, after 10 years, have you seen it all, or are there still things that keep you awake at night? I definitely wouldn't say that we've seen it all. You know, I would be extremely naive if I thought that. We've seen plenty. But honestly, I barely feel like we've seen anything. There's so much going on. There's so much in the world. And in the landscape of just e-commerce and retail and just business in general, ooh boy, I mean, no one, I mean, even whatever, Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and all these people who run these large companies and have had very influential things, even they really don't have perspective on everything that's going on. I think hubris and thinking that you know everything is just one of the worst things that you can have in business. You know, so I think that I'm humbled every single day in terms of what I don't know. And that's never a concern. You know, and then there's contextual things. Just things change constantly. Just one fairly recent example in the last year or so is economic nexus. So like the sales tax laws changed with the Wayfair versus South Dakota that happened last year. That really opened up, you know, the Supreme Court, it's not the Supreme Court, sorry, just that state kind of ruled on that. No, it was a Supreme Court ruling, sorry, yeah, that was the one that got passed out the Supreme Court, and they interpreted it as, they can collect sales tax based on economic nexus, not just a physical presence in the state, and that has just blown the doors off of online retail in terms of states being able to enforce their sales tax. You know, and I have no judgment necessarily whether that's right or wrong or otherwise. Of course, I have my opinions about it. But you know, the law is the law, and I by far will uphold the law. It has definitely been confusing and a bit rocky in terms of how to actually do that, because a lot of states very quickly passed laws with outdated systems, very poor ways to actually be able to collect the taxes, and literally there's some states where they don't even have a website. You have to fax them the information and physically write a check and mail it to them every single month for the sales tax you've collected. It's a very outdated system. It's very obvious that there was no cohesive plan, that everyone was prepared to be able to collect these taxes. It's just that was how the law happened, and a bunch of states just rolled out some very kind of confusing laws very quickly about collecting those, and we're doing our best to comply. But you know, and it's not even the same threshold that every business applies, because some states have different rules and all that. It's been very confusing to come out. So I mean, that's just an example of something that, you know, we kind of knew that was a potential thing that could come, but we had no idea what that would look like or when it would happen. So when it did happen, we were kind of like, oh boy, here we go. We were ready for this, sort of, but we didn't know what it would look like, and it ended up being a very confusing process. Mad props to Rachel for sorting a lot of that out. But I mean, we had to go and find, a special like CPA consultant from like across the country who specialized in state sales tax, because even the local CPAs we had around here, they were not up to snuff enough to feel they could really consult with us. So, you know, just stuff like that is like very few people even knew what was going on and what the laws were and how to interpret them and all that. So things like that, you know, yeah, we can feel great about what we've done in 10 years, but boom, this like meteor comes out and it's like, oh, this is a whole new thing now that everybody's having to deal with, you know, any regulatory changes or stuff like that. And there's not a whole ton of that happens in like e-commerce, but that was definitely a big one. I know in other industries, people in other businesses, stuff like that happens all the time. You know, I remember Rachel when she worked at Capital One before, that was when like the Sarbanes-Oxley stuff, the laws were passed, and that was hugely impactful for Capital One being a financial institution. When Rachel was there, that really changed their whole processes and stuff. So everybody deals with this kind of stuff from time to time. So you're never really resting easy so much, but you know, other things that are on my mind is, you know, there's going to be another recession that's going to come at some point. I'm not naive. You know, historically, that would usually happen every 7 or 8 years. We're kind of overdue for one based on historical, you know, whatever. And this is up for great debate as to all the what's and whys. And I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that because I'm not an economist, and it's definitely not within my like circle of influence to really pontificate about this a lot. You know, but certainly as someone who's responsible for this company, you know, from a fiscal standpoint as well as caring for my team, you know, we're openly recruiting for positions and got to be aware of the job market and these types of things. It does behoove me to be broadly aware of some of these things, just so I'm not completely blindsided if something major happens. So we've got this little rainy day fund kind of set aside for whatever might happen in the future. We kind of keep that at all times, but I've got that little fund set aside. So it's like, okay, if things get a little rocky at Goulet Pens, our team's gonna be taken care of. You know, we're not gonna sweat. And I think, you know, just having that perspective on things, just like kind of preparing for the unknown. You know, you mentioned keeps me awake at night. I literally don't lose any sleep over this business. I don't. I have a really good perspective on what this business is. You know, as much as I'm like associated with it, it's my name and my face is in so many of the videos. I also know that it was a great gift to be able to do this. And even if tomorrow everything goes away and I'm just regular old person on the street, you know, I'll be grateful for the time I've had, and I'll just continue to work with the skills I have and put my best foot forward. So, you know, I really don't worry about like all this being taken away or something major happening. Part of that's just my personality style. I'm really just not a worrier. I'm a really good improviser and not fearful of whatever, you know, meteors could be out there. I'm like, okay, we'll adapt. We'll figure it out, you know, and I'll just really appreciate and enjoy what we have while we have it. And when crazy things happen, we'll deal with it at the time, while also preparing for like, you know, not living completely on the edge. It's not like the bank account's at zero and I'm like, oh, the money will come. No, not like that at all. Very conservative in that way, but also being, you know, very kind of aggressive in terms of seeking opportunities and being open to change and stuff like that. So I think, you know, just in general, from a business owner's perspective now, you know, I've read different statistics and things like that of, you know, if you've run a business and you still have it after 10 years, you know, there's only about 4% or so of businesses that are still, you know, haven't been acquired or gone out of business after 10 years. So, you know, 4% is not that many in the grand scheme of things. So I think that most people probably burn out after year 7 or 8, or there's some kind of recession that knocks them out, or there's, you know, somebody comes along and just gives them a good offer and they want to cash out and just do something else. I know a number of different business owners, and that's happened to a bunch of them. So, you know, but the ones that are really in it for a long time, it's probably more actually common in like the fountain pen retailer side of things. I know more fountain pen retailers that have been around for more than 10 years than most people that I know just kind of in the general business industry. So that's kind of cool. I think the mom and pop kind of hobbyist enthusiast kind of thing, the passion really helps everybody to kind of stick in there even when times get hard. You know, but I think if it was the kind of situation, if I was really losing a lot of sleep at night over this, I would have really feel burned out by now. And, you know, I probably don't get enough sleep anyway. That's why you see some bags under my eyes. But that's because I get really excited. I also get just the way I'm wired, I get more creative at night. And then, you know, the pressures of the day are gone. I'm not getting emails or Slacks or getting bothered by anybody. The kids are in bed and they're all nestled in their beds. You know, Rachel and I have had our time together, and my mind is kind of free and clear. So I'll often work at night just because that's when the energy starts flowing for me. So I might lose sleep because of that, but it's really coming from a good place. So just, I'm still 10 years in, I'm still excited, I'm still coming up with ideas, and I love doing what I do. So I'm very fortunate, very blessed in that way. Yeah, I think that's my perspective on it. I think if you find the right thing that you really love to do, even though it's really, really hard and it takes a ton of energy and time and effort to do it, when you really love it, that's what carries you through. Elizabeth K on Facebook asked, what are the biggest changes in the market in the last 10 years, and then just in pens or inks? So I think one change that I've seen is, this is kind of a, you know, more of a big picture, kind of ethereal thing, but the U.S. Department of Education no longer requires cursive writing in schools. So that happened maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And surely it's having an impact, a long-term impact on just the writing, the interest in writing. I don't know if it's definitely not super helpful, just because if you're not teaching anyone how to write really intently, are they still going to write in the future? It's not anything that's going to change overnight, but over time, it's going to become such a weird and rare thing for somebody to be able to write and have like decent handwriting and all that. I don't know if it's necessarily as doom and gloom as it may seem, because really fountain pens have largely been functionally obsolete for 60 years, maybe 70, since the ballpoint came out. And then of course now you have, you know, computers and phones and voice technology and all these other things, where a fountain pen is definitely not a necessity. Okay, maybe for some of us it's a necessity to our heart and to our soul, but really in terms of a like utilitarian functional thing from like an economic perspective, fountain pens are really a niche, obscure hobby, an interest-based thing. It's not something that's core to the function of society like it was, you know, in the early 1900s, when it was really a tool for communication. Now, yes, it is still a tool, but it's largely a passion-driven interest, and I have good perspective on that. And I also have a strong passion and interest towards that. So I get it, but at the same time, in really looking at the big picture, I don't really know how the impact of something like, you know, cursive not being in schools will impact, you know, I'm not like celebrating like, yay, but at the same time, it's already a very passion-driven interest. And, you know, when I look at, yes, okay, the school system is not teaching it, but at the same time, just to give a different perspective on it, because my Myers-Briggs profile is the debater, so I will debate the issue here. There's a lot of people that I know who were exposed to fountain pens earlier on when they were in school, and were like slapped on the knuckles with a ruler in their, you know, with their strict teachers about not forming their letters perfectly. Yes, they learned how to write in cursive, but they didn't enjoy doing it, you know, because back in the day it was really about conformity, and there was even like a strong like kind of a moral and ethical tie to it, especially in the United States, you know. Spencer's, you know, Spencerian writing, Platt Roger Spencer, he was like really into a tie between like your handwriting and kind of your like moral, ethical, spiritual, you know, whatever you call it. I'm completely losing the word, but how much of those things you were. You know, whether or not you believe in that, it's certainly not the case today with that belief, but I think there is a beauty, you know, to letter forms and all that, but at the same time, it's not. It's definitely not the norm for that, and it's certainly not taught in schools that way. And it's interesting because like we actually just had our parent-teacher conference with our kids in school, and there's just a number of things they're doing different, even from when Rachel and I were in school, which we don't feel like we're really old at all, but at the same time, I feel old when I meet their teachers that are 10 or 15 years, you know, whatever, however many years younger than we are, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. I get it. We're getting up there in age. We're not old. Believe me, I'm not trying to say that, but we are getting older, as we all are. But the way they're doing math, they're not memorizing times tables anymore. They're doing regrouping, and even just spelling is different. It's not like you must spell correctly from day one. Now it's like they want the kids to enjoy writing and enjoy spelling and really kind of understand it and get the concept of it, but they're not necessarily being docked for like being perfect every step of the way, which actually for me is very kind of refreshing, because when I was in school, I was not perfect. I was very behaved and stuff like that, but my memory wasn't like super great. I was a little distractible and stuff like that. So, I just didn't do everything perfectly. So I think I would actually probably be more successful in the type of setting my kids are in school now. But anyway, I digress. The changes to the market in the past 10 years. So I think that, definitely the cursive writing and all that not being something that is like being formally taught is something that is going to have a longer term impact. So the flip side of that, which I just alluded to, with the rise of social media and the rise of things like YouTube and other tools where people can connect and really like find their passion and interest and go super, super deep into it and really provide themselves with resources that other people in the community have provided based on their own passions and interests. If somebody really wants to learn how to write really well, there are actually more resources at their fingertips through their electronic devices to learn how to do some of these things, whether it's handwriting or learning a musical instrument or whatever, learning how to build, roller coasters in their backyard, out of PVC pipe and wood. You can find pretty much anything that you want to do out there in an enthusiast community and through how-to videos and stuff like that. So that I think has had a huge impact on the pen world. And I've very much been involved in that and kind of ridden that wave, I guess, so to speak, of social media in a very good way, because, and we've really leveraged the tools that have been available through Instagram and YouTube and Pinterest and Facebook and Twitter and all these different platforms, our blog. Back 10 years ago or so, it was, there were a few forums, maybe some message boards, a couple of blogs. There were maybe some videos out there, but there was definitely no like huge following or anything like that. There was no one that was really standing out in that way. Of course, now all of these social platforms are very integral into billions of people's lives and can really be a huge source of education and inspiration into whatever your interest may be, and that has certainly been the case for pens. So I think, just videos, the rise of video and video education, not only in terms of the education, but just in terms of, when you're watching a video of mine, you're inviting me into your phone or into your home, on your TV maybe. I mean, I've literally talked to folks who, like to sit down as a couple together on their date night and watch Q&A. And I'm extremely touched by that, but I'm like, that just was not really happening 10 years ago. You know what I mean? Even the idea of like, I'm just not going to have television. I'm just going to have YouTube. Like the number of people I have that just watch YouTube videos instead of television, like that's a legit thing that people do these days. Of course, now like just Disney Plus just came out this week, and there's Hulu and Netflix and all these other things. But so just there's so much that's changed in the last 10 years in terms of how people are spending their time and consuming content and educating themselves. That has been really interesting to see, and I think has undoubtedly had an impact on the pen world, just like the world at large. I think the rise of mobile, I think 10 years ago, I didn't even have a smartphone. Nowadays, everybody has access to information at their fingertips. I know looking at our own, analytics and stuff like that, there is more mobile traffic that comes to our website than there is desktop traffic. So we not only have to be mobile friendly in terms of an e-commerce store, but now the buzzword is mobile first, because the tables have turned for a lot of companies, and I think that's happening even in the pen world, of people that are primarily using their phones to get information, to purchase things, to watch videos or whatever. That's going to change things, and that is really not something that was the case 10 years ago. So that is certainly changing some things. In terms of like just pens and inks themselves, I think ink, thinking about that, I think it's just exploded in terms of colors and different properties, shimmer and things like that. Some of this was starting to come out 10 years ago. So I think about, maybe not quite 10 years ago, but the first shimmering ink that I can really think of was Jeroboam's Rouge Hematite. I mentioned that in the video that we published out yesterday of the milestone products, but that was really kind of a foreshadowing of what would eventually become this glut of different shimmering inks that would come out from boutique ink makers. So I think just, there were certain brands that really led the charge there that were around 10 years ago. I mean, if you go back like 20 years, it was really just standard colors, and you had a company like maybe Waterman who had 8 colors, and that was like the most extensive ink line that existed at 20 years ago. Now, 10 years ago, you had companies like Noodler's and Private Reserve and Diamine. You had some of these more boutique ink companies that had more of a color offering. Noodler's really pushed the boundaries, pushed the envelope in terms of ink properties. And there's, Nathan Tardif is just a genius and a mad scientist and is really passionate about doing that. He was already doing that 10 years ago, but I think he was really kind of a rogue in the industry for doing that, and maybe still catches a little flack today, but not as much as he used to, because he used to really be kind of standalone as the guy making these permanent inks and UV reactive inks and stuff like that, high sheening stuff. Nowadays, it's like there's glitter, there's all kinds of high sheening stuff. There's really interesting things going on with ink that is across a lot of different brands, and it's just much more open. People are receptive to higher maintenance inks in their pens, and they're willing to tolerate that, so they can get the inks they want. So that is definitely one thing that's happened. The idea of like more premium inks, that is something that is more of a thing now. It really started about 5 or 6 years ago. Pilot Iroshizuku was a huge factor. Maybe it was more than 5 or 6 years ago. Pilot Iroshizuku was a huge factor. You had some Sailor inks back in the day that were impactful. You had, of course, you had your boutique inks that were like that. But honestly, even the boutique inks like the Diamine, Noodler's, Private Reserve, they were more affordable. Simpler bottles, interesting colors. Some simple theming and stuff like that. Nathan would get really artistic and do some interesting artwork on his bottles, but they were not premium products by any means. Noodler's, in fact, is the opposite. Try to make it affordable as possible. But really, Pilot Iroshizuku kind of was a game changer in that way. And then you had Pelikan Edelstein, you've had Faber-Castell, you've had Caran d'Ache, you've had a number of different kind of premium inks that have really come out in the last 10 years. So that's definitely expanded quite a bit. And then with pens, I'm thinking, there's definitely much more of a trend of special editions, seasonals, more like small batch, limited things, little more edgy, wilder colors, bolder, designs and things like that are made more small batch. In the probably 20 years ago or so, in like the late 90s into the 2000s, you had a lot of limited editions that were happening, numbered limited editions that were really pushed hard, like for collectors. That was a big thing. Mont Blanc had a whole ton of them, and they're still definitely a thing. But I think now getting away from the numbered and the collectability for the sake of like investment, that has become less of the reason maybe why people are buying these pens. People are buying special edition pens because it speaks to them. They're kind of quirky and interesting. They really like it. They connect with it. They're enthusiastic about it, and they're going to use it. So I think the number of people that have gotten deep into like pen collecting and still using their pens, I think has risen in the last 10 years. There are very few people that I know that are buying them just to kind of hoard them, and hoard is probably a bad word, but buying them to collect them and kind of as an investment and keep them away, kind of just to have them. And certainly there's nothing wrong with that. Like, they're your pens, you can do whatever you want with them. But I think the vast majority of people, at least that we interact with, are using these pens, and they'll buy a Namiki or a Visconti or these kind of collector grade pens, and they'll just ink them up and use them just like you would use any other pen. And that to me is like the coolest thing. And I know, specifically talking to folks at like Pilot and other companies, Monograppa, that are actually making these pens, there's like nothing that brings more joy to the craftsmen that are making these pens than knowing that people are inking them up and using them every day. And I think that maybe from their perspective has always been a good thing, but I think the fact that people are doing that more and more now is a newer trend. And then I just think that in general, in terms of like the pen industry, the pen market, maybe community, there's just a more youth and diversity in the pen world now than there was 10 years ago. In fact, that was one of the impactful things that I noticed when I went to the DC Pen Show in 2009. I had kind of my epiphany of, wow, there's a really cool community here. But at the same time, it was coupled with, wow, I'm the only person without gray hair in this entire room, you know? And that wasn't any type of judgment or anything. That was just an observation of, you know, how is a younger person like me going to know anything about fountain pens? And that is what has fueled my engine in terms of producing so much content and connecting socially. It was like, you know, it wasn't necessarily catering to young people particularly, but being a younger person in a place where most of the people that had experience with fountain pens had, and this is really kind of in the US, I'm contextualizing, a lot of people like my parents' age, they used fountain pens in schools, and to them it was kind of commonplace. Their parents, that's really all they knew. So to them it was just kind of like, oh yeah, fountain pens, like yeah, everybody used fountain pens in school when we were younger, and then we didn't anymore. So everybody had this general awareness of fountain pens, and there were a lot more people kind of in the baby boomer age that were just aware of them, had used them, had pens passed down to them from their parents or whatever it might be. And there was just a lot of awareness around them, whereas my generation, millennials and Gen Z and so on, really there was a disconnect because we had never been exposed to them, you know, and then there's like a heavy emphasis on technology and computers and stuff like that. So there was really a big gap in knowledge of fountain pens. So I saw that as an opportunity to like, oh my gosh, these pens are so cool. How are young people going to be exposed to them at all? So that's where we got heavy into the education and the digital formats and stuff like that. And that's benefited everybody, not just young people, but certainly younger people really would not have had access to fountain pens without some of the education and social media stuff that has developed in the last 10 years. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. I think, you know, and if you like go to pen shows on a pretty regular basis, which I don't go to a ton of pen shows, but I at least go to the DC show every year, and I try to go to a couple others if I can. But there's a noticeable difference these days between the number of, I'll call them younger people that are going, not necessarily kids, though there are kids there, just younger working professionals, people, whatever, who have means to go to these shows. That is becoming more and more of a thing, and there's so much vibrancy and vitality and excitement and enthusiasm for newer people, you know, people that are going to these shows who maybe wouldn't have years ago. So it is definitely, it's not like, you know, all the digital world is young people and all the pen show goers are old. It's not the case at all. There's a lot of cross mixing going on, and to me, it's beautiful to see. There's so much just growth and vibrancy and diversity that's happening, you know, in the pen world in general, that's happened over the last 10 years. So I think in general, just the accessibility of the information has been great for everybody. All right, Kent P. on Facebook asked if you could offer advice to the pen manufacturers of the world, what would it be? All right, so this is a very interesting question to me, and I definitely wanted to take this one. I got a lot of really good questions this week. It was hard to pare it down. My initial pass was like 25 questions, and I was like, I got to cut this down. Anyway, so I will just kind of caveat this whole statement with, I really have the utmost respect for pen manufacturers. You know, it's not an easy job for any of them. I don't really care whether you respect a pen manufacturer or not. It is complicated. Like the manufacturing, the engineering that goes into it, it's complex. The supply chain management and distribution and everything, it is complex no matter what the brand is. So I have the utmost respect for all pen brands. I really do. I definitely don't think that I know best, that I know better than any of them, because that's not really my space. I have a perspective maybe that I can lend for any manufacturer that's willing to engage in that conversation, but by no means am I like, I know better. I'm just like, here's my perspective. You know, tell me what you think. What do you think about this? What if you were to, how about this? You know, that's generally how I approach things. And I've met with number of different manufacturers, and that's usually how the conversation goes. So, you know, for me, I think my advice, given very humbly, to them would just be really to lean in to the accessibility and engagement of the pen community. I think historically in the past, there has been many degrees of separation, not just in the pen world, but just in manufacturing in general. Especially the more global you go, the harder it is to really wrap your hands around just all of it. Because when you get into distribution, you get into all kinds of different laws and regulations and cultures and shipping logistics and currency conversions, and it gets really, really complicated. That's why a lot of larger companies have like global export managers and local territories that, or distributors they work with who are nuanced to all the intricacies of their territories. It gets really, really complicated. However, I think that there is more of an opportunity for manufacturers to really be able to connect with the end users. Because if a company is global, they might have, their own internal staff that they're working through. They might have a distribution network that consists of distributors or even a chain of distributors, retailers, and then the customer. So there may be many, many degrees of separation, whereas now, with social media, literally the CEO of a global company can directly interact with the end users of their pens. So that is something that has really given a lot of opportunity to manufacturers to really engage with the audience that is receptive to their pen designs. Some manufacturers have really taken advantage of that. I'm thinking like TWSBI specifically. TWSBI, the founders, Jim and Philip Wang, they're like a father and son team that are at TWSBI there. They, especially in the early days when they were starting, would post a lot of things on Facebook, post prototypes, and get feedback directly. Even still, they're active on Instagram and all that. So, to give a little nod to TWSBI, they were kind of birthed in the pen world. They were doing, manufacturing in other ways, but they really came out with, they had a lot of experience then before they came out with the TWSBI brand. But once they came out with their own kind of TWSBI brand, they really leveraged the engagement of the community to determine what people like. They tweaked the products. They would come out with different versions. They iterated. They came out with more improved versions. And I mean, now TWSBI is kind of iconic, especially for people starting out in the pen world, partly because of their accessibility and things like that. So they are, in many ways, a success story, but at the same time, they're not doing anything special that really anyone couldn't do. And in fact, they may even have far fewer resources than other companies to be able to do that. I think most manufacturers at a very high level kind of understand what's going on, and it's not that they don't find that there's any value in it. I think it's just there's such a difference in how you operate mentally, if anything, with so much accessibility and conversation to be had. I think really all manufacturers, not just the pen world, but everybody's kind of like figuring out what the world looks like now that there are so fewer barriers for communicating, especially directly with your customers. So I know that it's the kind of thing that there's risk involved. If you do it wrong, can you make your brand look bad? Especially if you're a multi-generational thing, and there's different countries and language barriers and stuff like that. Like I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but I do just kind of believe that there is an opportunity for manufacturers to really be able to break down some of those maybe potential barriers that would be there for people to connect with their brand and for them to be able to receive really helpful feedback from the community. And just us as a retailer, we're in a kind of a unique place because we represent a lot of different brands, and we're not ultimately the ones who are responsible for how those pens are being made. We can choose to carry them or not based on whether we believe in them and support them. And that's kind of like the way that we do it. Just like a manufacturer, if they weren't able to manufacture something well, they would stop making it and make something else they could make. That's kind of like our version of how we do that. But I think that as a retailer, we have really leaned into that and tried to leverage that a lot and show the human side of what we do. And I mean, any of you have watched Q&As and all the videos, and you know more about me than probably you ever would have about any retailer 20 years ago. Unless somebody like wrote a book about their personal life. But even then, I mean, you've been following me along for 10 years, possibly. So there's an opportunity for connection, for human connection there in a way that's never been had before. So that would be my message to manufacturers would be try that. maybe lean into that a little bit. I think that it could be really, really interesting to see because, I mentioned Twisby, but I think even there's more opportunity than what they've done to be able to do that. So I think that if I think there's opportunity for a pen manufacturer to do that really, really well, kind of show the human side, the behind the scenes of the business, not just using it as sort of another broadcasting platform, but, really, really seek to learn it well and understand the kind of titanic shift that has happened in, just communication in general. I think that it would be nuanced. It would require some vision, a lot of thoughtfulness, risk, kind of dedication to the process. But it's out there for anyone who wants it. And I think the general pen community would really, really, they're just hungry for that connection to manufacturers. And I think that that's something that really could be happening more. All right, Carol V on Facebook asked, what has been the key to keeping your business feeling so personalized and customer friendly, as familiar as if there were a brick and mortar at the end of the street? I think it's the Goulet Pen video content that contributes to the feeling of inviting a friend named Brian to stop by several times a week and talk fountain pens. Well, I appreciate that. That's honestly sort of some of the vision we came up with in the beginning. We wanted to have that exact kind of feeling of familiarity, like somebody who really is passionate and understands that mom and pop, on Main Street kind of thing. They really love the same things that we love. They're willing to share in that with us, but doing it kind of at scale because we can't have everybody come to our business, right? So we do that in kind of an online setting. So just adapting that idea to kind of a modern way of doing it. And so, for us, it's been all in the approach and kind of the methodology or maybe the principle behind it, a little bit less about the mechanics because the mechanics are going to change. So for us, I think it really helped a lot when in 2014, we really helped to kind of define our purpose. And we were living it out already, but our purpose as Goulet Pens is to prove that business can be personal. Now you can take that a lot of different ways. It's pretty open-ended, as purpose statements can sometimes be. I think this can look like a lot of different things over 10 years. I already mentioned the handwritten notes thing, how that's adapted and changed. I used to put my email address at the end of every video. Now that's not necessarily the best way to serve. Now there's like software platforms and things like that where if you want to call up and place an order over the phone, I'm actually one of the worst people in this company to do that because I'm not that knowledgeable about that system these days. My team is much better at that than I am. So, I think, it has to look like different things and adapt over a 10-year period. But I think, the approach is really what's important. So you kind of keep that same feeling, even if it looks a little bit different. I think that our approach is going to change and evolve, just as your customer sentiment is going to change. Buying, shopping, what you consider to be good service, things like free shipping and sales tax and all these types of things. All this is going to evolve over time. Our approach has really, from very early on, to be very authentic, very open, kind of as who we are. Show that we're human, and let the humanness lead what we do. We still, as we grow, we have to think about systems and technology and automation and things like that just to be practical. But we take a very human-based approach to it where we want to, basically, instead of me as a CEO, I'm not looking at our P&L and our payroll and stuff like that and saying, we need to get this number down. Let's kick some people out the door and get a new system, and then our ratio will be better or whatever. It can be more profitable. I really don't look at it that way. I look at it and I say, okay, we've hired good people. I want to be in business for a long time. I want to be profitable so that we can seek opportunities and allow more ways for people to grow on our team and stay with us and thrive and raise their families and all that. So I'm like, okay, we're definitely not we've never had a layoff, like a company-wide kind of deal. I hope we never have to get there. But I look at it and I go, okay, I want all of our people to have more opportunity and make more money. How can we look at systems and put things in place so that the things that you as the customer don't necessarily see as much, that you won't necessarily be impacted by a human doing it. If it can be automated, great, let's automate that so that we spend less time on that and we can spend more time with the good people we've hired to be doing the human elements of what matter. And that will not only come across better to you, that automation will provide for more efficiency. I can pay my good people more over time, give them more responsibility for the human brain thinking things and personal relational connecting, the things that you can't really automate, and then it'll be a win for everybody. So that's generally the approach that I like to take in terms of running this business, is let's have humans do the things that humans do best, and let's have machines do the things that machines do best. So that is a bit of a wandering thought there, but that humanness is really, really important. And what that's evolved into over time for us has been a really strong company culture, really focusing on strong vendor relationships, because being a retail business, if we don't get the right products in that you want, then we're just kind of entertaining you and we're not really providing you with service as a retailer. So good vendor relationships really matters a lot, especially as we're developing products with our more and more manufacturers. Exemplary customer service, all this stuff is really important. So when we care, we show that and connect in other ways that make sense and are practical given the resources that we have available to us today, then we're living out that purpose of proving that business can be personal. All right, Aisha0222 on Instagram says that we know the backstory of Goulet Pens, but why pens? Why not wood candle stands? I thought that was funny, wooden candle stands, why not? Well, they'd be flammable for one, so I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing. No, but it's funny that you asked this, and I want to take this question because I don't know that I've talked a whole lot about this, but my original vision for this business was making stuff out of wood. There's no question about that. I love wood, I love woodworking. I started making pens out of wood. That was originally my goal. I made pens out of wood because, they were small and quiet enough and cheap enough where I could do that as a hobby. So I made wood pens, I made wood wine bottle stoppers and keychains. We did some Virginia Tech licensed wooden pens, and we considered all kinds of other little random wood tchotchkes that were small and could be turned on a lathe. I really took to the lathe. That was something very enjoyable that I still love doing, even in my limited time that I'm able to do it. I even considered doing like antique writing boxes. Really, I just wanted to make things out of wood. So I had brainstormed all kinds of different ways. The thing about making handmade wooden tchotchkes out of wood is there's no real enthusiast-driven community of people that are buying these things. There is an enthusiast community of people that are making them, and that's definitely true in the wooden pen world. A lot of them are, maybe retired individuals who've loved woodworking and they really just want to fund their hobby. So they'll do craft fairs and they'll sell stuff on Etsy, and more power to them. That's amazing that they have an avenue to do that, because it definitely gives a lot of purpose to making wooden things. However, in terms of actually building a viable business, that is an uphill climb when you don't have a community of people that are really looking for the things that you're making. And I learned that the hard way myself for 3 years before getting into the fountain pen scene. I was trying to sell my wooden pen wares, and it was an uphill battle, even before the economy tanked in 2008 and 9. So in the earliest days when I was really excited, very naive, and I was thinking, how can I make things out of wood so that I can just work with wood, because that's really all I want to do. I just want to make enough money so that I can just be doing what I'm doing, because that's the dream for me. Before I had kids and all this stuff. So my parents actually bought a laser engraver, and they were in the desktop publishing business for years as I was a kid, and they got into the printing business. So I guess my dad was intrigued with the technology. My dad's kind of a futurist and was really intrigued with the technology of laser engraving, because it was able to take some of the desktop publishing type knowledge that he had and really apply it towards physical media, right? So he was just intrigued with that and the versatility that a laser engraver had. And so he just bought one on spec. This was around the time that I started getting into the wooden pens. And so it actually ended up working out kind of serendipitously where, I was making wooden pens, and the company that I first sold to that was engraving pens as Christmas gifts and giving them out to their clients, well, I had a laser engraver, access to a laser engraver where I can make wooden pens, engrave the names of the people, and then sell them. So it really kind of worked out nicely like that. But as we were kind of in between, corporate orders like that, we would dream up all these random things that we could do. And my parents and I and Rachel were dreaming up what could we possibly make out of wood that we could laser engrave. That was kind of the context of what we were looking at. And I remember one particular day where we were brainstorming all this stuff, and if you can imagine, my dad and I are not that dissimilar from each other. My mother is much more reasonable and quiet. My dad is rather energetic and creative and passionate like I am, with obscure interests, the kind of guy that would buy a laser engraver on spec. And so he and I, when we really get on a roll, as you could probably imagine, we might get a little intense. And Rachel had kind of just this like throw her hands up in the air moment of like, I can't really handle all this. And kind of the joke of the catalyst that we had, we were brainstorming all kinds of ideas, but one of the ideas that we threw out was like personalized laser engraved wooden pet urns. And it was with the best of intentions, but neither of our families have pets. It was just like, I wonder if this could be an idea. And Rachel was like, engraved wooden pet urns, Brian. And I was like, yeah, okay, may have jumped the shark a little bit with that idea, but we were just kind of brainstorming stuff like that. So, if you're asking like why pens was just one of the more practical things that I could actually make at that time. Even without a lot of strong interest in wooden objects around the people that I knew. Everybody used pens, and you could be like, oh, that's interesting. Wow, you made that? And I could sell, and just my passion for woodworking and all that would be enough, generally speaking, where people would be like, well, I definitely could use a pen. Maybe I could buy one for my father-in-law. He could use it. Okay, this is kind of cool. I'll get it. And so that's part of what fueled the pen thing was practicality. And part of it was, just the first pen that I ever made, which I actually still have right here because Andy just gave me all the pens back that she used for making the video that was the milestone products. This is literally the first pen that I ever made, and it's not that fancy. In fact, I can point out some of the flaws here, but it's just funny to look back. I had some chatter right here. Didn't get good sanding or good finish right here, so it's kind of rough looking. I think I ended up with a crack right here, just because the wood maybe wasn't dry enough and it split over time. The finish on it's not great. The fit on it is not great. I gouged out the end here. But I didn't see any of that at the time that I made it. I was just like, I turned this thing out of, I don't even know what type of wood this is because it was just like a scrap bundle of wood because I had no money. So I just bought like, what's the most wood that I can buy? So I just bought this bundle pack. Ironically enough, I used like 10 pieces of wood out of the bundle. Anyway, it would have been cheaper for me to buy by the piece. That's neither here nor there. So I made this pen the first day. It's weird that this is like literally the pen. I mean, it was July of 2007. That's when I first made the pen. And I pressed it together and I was like, holy crap, I just made something. And that was just really cool. And I just had an emotional connection with making the pen. I made 3 more that day. I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing. I just made 4 pens today. That is amazing. And it just kind of went on from there. So really, really cool. I just dig it. I love the tactile nature of pens. I'm a very tactile person, being a woodworker and all that. And I really just felt a calling. I felt a calling through pens. It's, even a series of things that happened. I tried all these different things, but ultimately it was the fountain pen, going to fountain pen show and just really diving into that world. I never would have guessed it growing up because I liked pens and mechanical pencils and stuff like that. And I would like take them apart and fiddle with them in class, but I really had no exposure or particular knowledge or passion in pens above anything else. But it just, the pens found me. And that's really all I can say about that. Had I felt the same way about, maybe wood candlestick holders or candle stands, I might have gone that route. But the pens were my destiny. All right, Veru1 on Instagram. How did you manage to stand out from all the other fountain pen retailer companies? I think for me, back in the early days, I had no perspective, really no perspective on the pen industry in general. As a whole, Rachel certainly didn't either. And largely, we stood out because we didn't know what was going on. We were new to it all. So not really knowing anything, we basically had to search online because we had no other resources. There were no pen stores locally in our area. There was no one that I knew that was into pens. I just kind of stumbled on it and was exposed to this magical world. And found the Fountain Pen Network forum and a few blogs and some other, message boards and stuff like Pen Trace and some of that type of stuff back in the day, and just started talking with the pen community and just realized, oh my gosh, this is deep. There's passionate people. These products are cool. I couldn't really find, though, a single, human face on the internet. There were lots of message boards and there were some avatars, and maybe somebody who was a blogger might have a picture of themselves in their About Us page on the blog, maybe, or maybe just of their cat. But I think just no one was really putting themselves out there as look, I'm really into pens, kind of a pen enthusiast, and the idea of an influencer back then wasn't so much of a mainstream thing. Somebody like Gary Vaynerchuk, who wrote his book in 2009, which I read, and that was really impactful for going down this road, he was very weird at the time for doing that, even in the wine world, which was much, much different than the pen world, much bigger than the pen world. In the pen world, there were people that did pen shows and there were prominent retailers and stuff, but for somebody new, me at the time, I got no sense of who anybody was in the pen industry. And even retailers and other things, I didn't know who the humans were. I would see names, I would see brands, but I didn't see humans. And that was really, that stuck out to me. So I think it was much more common at that time, even for people who were smaller and just getting into it, to have a website and have a lot of we language, whether it was one person in their garage or whatever, they would act kind of as a company and as a brand and use the website to kind of hide the fact that they were actually quite small and wouldn't show their picture and stuff like that. And so to me, I was like, I'm going to flip this over. We are small. We are just starting out. This is extremely humbling. And so we're just going to put that on display and be like, hey, everybody, come along the journey with us. I'm trying to figure out this pen stuff. Let's learn it together. You share with me. I'll share it back out with you. And if we're here long enough, maybe eventually, literally I have my journal. I've showed it in Q&A before. I have my journal where I wrote out maybe in 20 years I can be considered an expert. But for right now, authenticity is going to be the key. And here we are still. So I think that mentality of you know what, I'm not an expert and I'm actually going to show everyone that. Now, when I produce stuff and try to teach with expertise, I need to have expertise over what I'm talking about. So I would spend 8 to 10 hours, I'm not joking, learning, preparing, shooting, editing, publishing a blog or a video about a pad of paper. That was entirely impractical for most people to do. But at the life stage I was in, all I had was time. I had no money. I had time. So I would do that. And I just learned the ropes from the ground up. And that's what happened. So there were not a lot of people that were producing educational content on a regular basis. I thought that was incredibly needed. And then especially showing themselves and connecting as a human. That was special, and I wanted to do that. I really wanted to connect with somebody. In fact, even still today, there's not that many people that I follow with the general interests that I have that do that. There's a couple. I really connected. Actually, that's not true. Before I got into the pen thing, when I was doing woodworking, I was really big into Norm Abrams with the New Yankee Workshop. So he was on PBS. Think about somebody like Bob Ross, for example. Has a face, a brand, a persona, whatever you want to call it, and was teaching people how to paint. That's something that's been going on for a long time in different industries, but now, of course, there's a cult following with Bob Ross. Norm Abrams did the same thing with This Old House, with the New Yankee Workshop, was showing as a woodworker, but he was also a human, showing his face, talking to you, and I was like, hey, I can relate to this guy. Oh man, he's got a scraggly beard. I wonder if I could have a scraggly beard. Oh, he wears a lot of flannel. Is that something a lot of fountain pen people do? I was very naive, and so it was being able to connect with a human like that was really meaningful for me. And I did that with David Marks, who had a show on the DIY channel called Woodworks. He was a fellow woodworker too. And so just I connected with a couple of different woodworkers who put themselves out there a little bit in that way. And so I had, I guess, kind of an emotional tie to being a new person into a thing, seeing an expert as a human, teaching me something, and I was like, that's really cool. And so that came very natural to me when I came in a position where I was like, well, I don't have the expertise in the pen world, but I know how much I love this, and I bet if I was to flip it around and do this for people, they would probably love it too. And I would say that I was right for many people. Let's see here. How did I manage to stand out? Yep, so I did that. Gary Vaynerchuk mentioned that. So yeah, just the rest is history. You know, we produced thousands of pieces of content on pens over 10 years. And that's been one of the things that stood out the most. You know, I don't know whether it's we've produced all this content and so, you know, we have grown as much as we have, or because we've grown, we've continued to put out content. It's the two are very intertwined. And then the passion is just the glue that holds it all together. But ultimately, really, it's just us as people. Even if everybody else was doing a similar tactic, you know, producing the same type of content, and certainly we've had other, you know, people that put out content out there, and even content that's very similar to stuff that we've done. But even still, the biggest differentiator, no matter what you're doing, is the people that you have in your company. And that was something that I read and reflected about very early on. I was like, yeah, you know what? Even thinking about a company like Amazon 10 years ago, I was like, yeah, you know what? A larger company, somebody who's better, faster, stronger, smarter, has more money, whatever than we do, the one thing they will never have is the people that we have in our company. They could have every other possible resource, but they will never have the same people. And I was like, you know, that's really special, and that's kind of cool. So I put myself out as a person. We focus a lot on culture and things like that here, because a company's culture can never be copied because it's made of people. And that human element of it was really special. So not to say that other pen retailers don't have some of those things too, but even if they focus a lot on culture and their own humanness, they're different humans than we are. So in fact, to flip it around, I'm not trying to say that other retailers aren't doing this well. I think other retailers should do it more, as much as we do, or more, just because I think that there's amazing people in this pen industry, be it manufacturers, distributors, retailers, people, you know, enthusiasts, community members, who, if they connect and share themselves, like the people that are into fountain pens really are special people. And I can say that after having met and been around a lot of them over a decade. And so it's really cool, and I think that everybody sharing their own human selves is what makes this such an incredibly rewarding thing to be involved in. There you go. Getting a little emotional at the end there, but I got one more question for you. This is from Radio Dawson on Twitter. How have your ideas about running a business, all aspects, including company culture, etc., changed or evolved over the last 10 years? And then after seeing the fountain pen world evolve through the digital revolution, what are your predictions for the next decade? How will pens change? So I took this question. Really, I could have taken 5 other ones, because there was definitely a theme of how have things changed over 10 years and what do you think is going to happen over the next 10 years. So this is one question here to represent many that you all asked. I think I've changed so much about what it means to run a business. Almost everything, you know. Probably the one common element that has happened throughout has been just the core values, you know, and the mission and purpose and things like that. But really the values are one thing that we've never changed. You know, even these things, the values, mission, purpose, all that, even that can change with a lot of intentionality and effort. But really those are kind of the backbone that you should be able to fall back on. All the tactics, the mechanics, what things look like, the website design, particular methods of customer service or shipping, or blah, 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 products you carry and vendor relationships you have, and da, 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 da. All that can be fairly fluid and change over time. And there are certainly some companies that majorly change things that they do. I want to say I can't remember if well, actually, for example, okay, Pilot pens, right? yeah, they're a pen company now, and they make ink and a lot of other things too. They started out as like a shipping logistics. Like that's why they have like ships and stuff like that on a lot of their anniversary pens, is because they were like sailing the high seas as tradespeople. That was originally what Pilot was, and then got into writing instruments and all that. Like there's fundamental changes that can happen even with that with a company over a long period of time. Certainly, that can happen. What's to say I could do this for 30 years? My kids or somebody else may come along and evolve and take it in a completely different direction. That's possible. It can happen. But hopefully, the core values and the ways, the approaches about how we run our business will stay true. So I think we've gotten a lot smarter, gotten much more aware, more experienced. We were 25 when we started this whole thing. We were new parents and all that, just very much just diving in with both feet and our eyes closed. I'd say we had everything to learn really back in the day. It's not unlike when you start a family. You start out, you're single, whatever, you date, you get married, you have kids, whatever your path may look like. My point is though that you may end up navigating health issues or crises or job changes or who knows. But I think, how you operate your family, can change wildly based on your circumstances, and you figure things out as you grow. But it's really your values and the relationships you have with each other that you lean on to get through those changes. Very similar kind of principle to what we've got going on here. I have no idea how reliably I could predict what's going to happen in the next decade in the pen world. I do now, reflecting back 10 years, I do think that there's a lot of aspects of the pen world today that I ended up historically being fairly accurate. Thinking about education, content, engaging, personal touch, all this type of stuff. Obviously, we would not be where we are today if I had been way off the mark with that. Of course you can only color in so much detail when something is that far out. But 10 years from now, gosh, it's so hard to say. I haven't had like major epiphanies. I'm hoping that not, drastic things change. I still see a lot of passion and enthusiasm for these writing products. I certainly think, especially with younger generations who are growing up so digital, that there actually could be a rise and a resurgence in analog tools, in more intimate personal connection, given the nature. Even just this week I was reading about Instagram looking to test taking away the like button and taking away likes off Instagram posts, because it's become so kind of superficial that people aren't actually connecting the way that they had originally intended when they created the app. And so that's a very intriguing kind of concept. Imagine a world where there's no Instagram likes. How would that change? Or just social media in general. I think there's going to be a lot of that kind of stuff that's going to evolve. The internet in general, it's in its infancy. My kids are growing up now knowing nothing but the internet, and you're going to have generations and teachers who know nothing but the internet that are now teaching kids in classrooms. So things are going to evolve over time. I'm very interested to see how that all pans out. So I would say 10 years ago, everybody that I knew kind of thought that the pen industry was on the decline, that it was surely going to shrivel up and die, that handwriting wasn't being taught in schools really, that everything digital was going to kill everything analog, and it was all going to change and go away. And certainly there are some companies that have not made the shift and have gone away. There are certainly some massive changes that have happened, but I think the fountain pen industry in general and the fountain pen community is as big or has grown as a whole more than it was 10 years ago, which I think if you'd gone back 10 years ago, even to a lot of people in the pen industry, they might have said, you're crazy. How in the world is the pen industry going to grow in the next 10 years? But I really think it has. I think there's definitely going to be a recession in the next 10 years. It's going to tumble some companies. I think others are going to grow and thrive as their passion continues to build for like niche analog tools like pens. fundamentally, I don't foresee any like super obvious changes. I think things like AR are going to be in VR. Those are going to become much more prevalent and impact things. Not sure how much over the next 10 years. I remember virtual reality being talked about a lot even when I was a kid. I remember playing some like virtual reality games at like our local science museum and stuff like that. You would have thought, literally it's like Back to the Future, where you would have thought everybody would be on hover skateboards and 3D billboards and stuff like that, and it definitely looks a little different than that now. But sometimes things change really fast and sometimes things change really slow. So I think given the fact that the fountain pen industry has largely been disrupted years ago, and there will be some more disruption for sure, but I think that the passion, the enthusiasm that people have, and just the inherent nature of people wanting to write and connect and touch analog products, I'm not bearish, on the pen community over the next 10 years. I think there's still so much opportunity out there that I really am excited to see how it pans out. So I, for one, am not planning on going anywhere. I love this community. I love what I do. The fact that I've been doing it for 10 years, sometimes I'm like, man, I feel like I am just getting started. I am more excited and more passionate about it now than I ever was, because I'm deeper into it and I appreciate it so much more. And I have a great team of people helping me, and I know more people in the industry, and I've got long-standing relationships with folks. I'm going to do my part to continue to grow this industry. I think there's going to be more exciting things to come over the next 10 years that I, for one, am extremely excited about. So there you go. That is my 10 questions for 10 years in business. Wrapping up our 10-year video series here this week. Thank you all very much from the bottom of my heart for 10 wonderful years. My question of the week for you this week is, I would just love to read what has been your most meaningful or maybe most memorable thing that Goulet Pens has done for you in this 10 years. Whether you've been with us for 3 weeks or all 10 years, I would love to know in the comments. What has been most impactful for you, whether it's a product launch, whether it's some random video that's happened, whether it's an interaction you had with one of my team on the phone, whether it's a Tootsie Pop in your package, whatever it may be. I would love for you to take a trip down memory lane and just reflect on that. That would mean a lot to me and to my team. That's all for this week. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe if you haven't already. I don't have any products for you to go check out because I didn't really show anything other than my one little humble pen, not for sale. We'll never sell it. That's all I got for you this week. Thank you so much, and right on.